there. Welcome to the EPRC Podcast. We are absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Emma Bragdon here with us. Emma is an EPRC member, also a very good friend of mine. She's also a transpersonal psychologist, has been a pioneer in the field of spiritual emergence/emergency since 1984, and has written 7 books and co-produced 2 documentary films on topics related to mental health and healing. Dr. Bragdon's book, A Sourcebook for Helping People in Spiritual Emergency, 1988, retitled A Sourcebook for Helping People with Spiritual Problems in 2006, was actually the first book published in English on the topic of spiritual emergency, which we'll be talking about today. In 2013, Emma founded Integrative Mental Health University, or IMHU.org. It's a not-for-profit organization that is actually an important ally of the EPRC. Amazing courses that we'll talk about as part of it. IMHU offers mostly online courses and presentations to the public and healthcare providers on the integrative paradigm of care, so body, mind, spirit, and community. And these courses emphasize the positive potential of spiritual experiences and spiritual practices like meditation in optimizing well-being. IMHU recognizes that many are having profound spiritual experiences through the use of plant medicines and psychedelics. So certified spiritual emergence coaches trained at IMHU assist individuals to integrate spiritual experiences like psychic openings that first appear to be disruptive, leaving one to question, am I going crazy? I've asked that. Dr. Bragdon is interested in putting practical shoes on theories and research surrounding spiritual awakening/spiritual emergence and crises people may have in their awakenings. So Emma, thank you so much. You have such an amazing biography. I read very little of everything you've done. So thank you so much again for being here, Emma. I was wondering if you would like to start just by telling us about yourself and your background and also how you became interested in spiritual experiences and mental health.
Okay, fine. I grew up in Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., in a beautiful natural environment, which has always been an important part of my own spiritual awakening process. My dad had taught pathology at Harvard Medical School and then was invited to be a researcher at the National Institutes of Health. So I had a lot of conversation going on the dinner table from him around research, and also got to know someone who was deeply involved with research as well as writing. He was very involved in the Journal of Lipid Research as an editor. So my mother was involved with nursing care, so obviously health concerns were a big part of what our life was about and what conversations were about. And so I went from living in a family like that was quite intellectually oriented and we could say more materialistic than spiritual, into a zone where I was craving to find something else, a life of meaning, let's say. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to meditation when I was 18. It produced a feeling of ecstasy with me within just a very short period of time. We're talking minutes. And I decided at that point that meditation was going to be the cornerstone of my life. So by the time I was 20, I was living in a Zen Buddhist meditation center. I won't say I was a nun because there were interactions between men and women. And I later married a man who had been the acting administrator of this Zen Buddhist center. So my orientation from quite a young age was towards my own expansion on a consciousness level and more into meditation than anything else, although meditation took several forms. In other words, I was first involved with Zen Buddhism, and then I also had a great deal of interaction over 20 years with Native American shaman from 2 different tribes who were acknowledged by their tribes. So this was not a secondary kind of a New Age shamanism. So I was extremely fortunate with the teachers that I had. And then I went on to study Spiritism in Brazil, which is an offshoot of spiritualism. And the reason I was so interested in it was because they recognize spiritual emergency, not in that vocabulary, but truly that's what they're looking at. And they're actually using that vocabulary now when they translate some of their work into English. So I was extremely interested in Spiritism, but my feet are in the grounding of the Self-Realization Fellowship right now, which people call the Church of All Religions, and is truly about a fellowship that gets together for meditation. So that is my spiritual leaning right now. And educationally, I earned my PhD at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in 1987, and I have been teaching since that time. So, does that answer your question, Shoshannah?
It does, just beautifully. And you did an amazing job because Emma has done everything. It's incredible. So that you were able to condense it into that was very impressive. Why do you think you had such a fast, so when you meditated, that had that moment of ecstasy? Because, some people will meditate for years and years and years and not notice much of a difference. What do you think it was that resulted in that sort of fast opening?
That's a good question. Part of it was I was with someone that I had a very profound love for, and I was actually in Greece. We were traveling there, and I felt a deep affiliation for the culture of Greece and the place we were in. So I was in an inspired position to begin with, and also on vacation. And
Nice.
I'm sure all of that helped. And I was also away from my country, my family, and all of the social conditioning that went with that. So I'm sure that all contributed. And some of us might think, oh, past lifetime too. And I've considered that as part of the dynamic that helped me to open, as if I had had lifetimes before when I'd meditated and I was touching base again.
That's amazing. Yeah, just remarkable. And so, as we're talking about, so meditation can bring about spiritual experiences or spiritual emergence. And also, as you talk about spiritual emergency. So, are you able to kind of distinguish between, so how you would define spirituality, and then you talked about spiritism, and then again, what spiritual emergence is, a lot of terms just to make it clear for the audience?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So starting with spirituality, my sense of it is it has to do with connecting with something that is much larger than our ego and connecting in a meaningful way. And for some people, that takes them into religion, and they appreciate the formality and the rituals of religion. And for some people, it takes them not into necessarily religion, but it takes them into a form of spirituality, which may take them into nature. It may take them into a life of meditation and prayer that may be associated with some ancient culture or may not be. Some people are just going to YouTube these days to do their meditation. But it's a clear recognition that there's something bigger and more beneficent that is beyond our ego. And by connecting with it in a meaningful way, we can move into a deeper sense of compassion for ourselves and others, as well as a deeper sense of communion with something that is much larger than ourself, that is full of compassion, joy, and wisdom.
It's beautiful.
So that's what I would say about spirituality for myself. And what my aspiration is, and I know many people involved with spirituality, is to reach a profound communion and to stay in that kind of communion with what some people will call God, some people will call it all that is, and there are many, many names for it, and sometimes it's nameless. But I think that's the overreaching goal of spirituality. And you were asking about spiritism, and I'm not saying it incorrectly. It's not spiritualism. Spiritism was started in the mid-19th century with an academic in France. He was French, Allan Kardec, and he looked at spiritualism and he said, oh, this is a study of the phenomena of spirit to human communication. But his interest was in creating spiritism was to create the goal more of how do we support each other to move towards that communion with the highest, and also to assist in our own personal evolution such that we become more ethical, moral human beings, not necessarily with judging around the 10 Commandments, but moving into a zone where we do have that communion and it brings out in us the very best. In other words, the compassionate and wise parts of us. So Spiritism is used by 20 to 40 million Brazilian people in Brazil. It's also all over the world. You can find Spiritism in small centers. But in Brazil, they have approximately 13,000 centers for Spiritism and 50 Spiritist psychiatric hospitals that are run by psychiatrists who are conventionally trained, but they also recognize the spiritual aspect of mental health and can work with people who are in spiritual emergence, meaning the process of spiritual evolution, or they can work with people in spiritual emergency, which are the crises that can occur when someone is in the process of spiritual awakening.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's so key. And what I was going to bring in then is, yeah, on the one hand, it can bring about these beautiful openings and this sense of interconnection and, yeah, part of something larger. But then if you don't have the background or knowledge about what's happening, like when someone does psychedelics for the first time without a healthcare provider, for example, you can get into this scary territory where you have like a loss of, on the one side, a wonderful loss of ego. But if you don't know what's happening, it can be quite scary. So is that part of your work then, is trying to assist people, as you say, in experiences like that?
So that's a huge part of my work, and I've been deeply involved in that since around 1983, 84, when I became a volunteer at the Spiritual Emergency Network that was started by Stan and Christina Groff in 1980. And so it's really valuable now to look at the fact that many people going into psychedelic or plant medicine experiences are having spiritual emergency because their intention is to awaken, and their intention is to have more awareness and to expand consciousness. But sometimes they meet up with experiences that are scary for them. Yeah. And they don't necessarily have a conceptual framework for it, and they don't know how to reach out for the kind of support that they need. And sometimes the people who are hosting these psychedelic ceremonies or plant medicine ceremonies also are not trained to help people in a spiritual emergency. And I'm now working with doctors, nurses, psychotherapists, counselors of various kinds, and coaches. And they also have not had training in their conventional training for how to work with spiritual emergency. And yet spiritual emergency is happening more and more frequently, not only because of psychedelics and plant medicines, but also just near-death experience, more because our resuscitation equipment is so much more effective now. More people are going through the process of being clinically dead, as we call it, flatlining, and then coming back and reporting most amazing experiences. So that's one place that we're seeing quite a bit of spiritual emergency, but there are other places too. In other words, people go on long meditation retreats, or they go into workshop intensives that might last a week and offer a lot of very powerful experiences, which can broaden a person's consciousness, but then on the other hand, help them to meet up with things that they just don't have the resources to manage. And oftentimes in those circumstances as well, including yoga retreats, the people leading them do not also have the training on how to recognize a spiritual emergency and how to help someone manage it. And they aren't also set up, the people in leadership, including also retreat administration, they aren't set up to help someone over time, like when the workshop is over, when the retreat is over, when the intensive is over, then people really wonder what they're going to do with this upset that's happened.
And what would a spiritual emergency look like? What would be an example then, like for someone who this is new knowledge, and what would be like an example of someone presenting with a spiritual emergency?
So I have one person that comes to mind immediately. She's a she's a relatively new client, and she's in her late 20s. She's not married. She doesn't have children. And she went to a retreat with Joe Dispenza, a chiropractor who has had a fabulous healing in his own life, really because of his own inner resources. And he's teaching people how to connect with those inner resources to their benefit and to create healing within themselves. So I hold Joe Dispenza in high regard. This is not about saying something judgmental about him, but to say that in that particular setting, it was highly charged for her to spend a week there with over 1,000 people who were in the audience. And she had a very strong, what is called Kundalini awakening, which means that there was a powerful amount of energy that was released and took her into shaking quite a lot, took her into being very surprised by how her body was acting, and also feeling very awkward being in the audience with all of this going on for her. And there was quite a bit of emotion attached to it as well. And what she told me was that there was no one who was holding the space of safety for all the retreatants there. No one who came to her and offered support, no one that she was advised she could go to, no place she could go to deal with what was going on with her. And yet she was very grateful, actually, for the kind of opening and awakening that was going on in the workshop. But she turned to Google and searched out spiritual emergency and found me because she really wanted support in what was going on with her on an energetic level. And so a Kundalini awakening, the Kundalini is a term that comes from Eastern philosophy, Eastern writings, and it is usually a manifestation of a tremendous amount of energy that actually can awaken consciousness by itself. But as consciousness is awakening, so to look at the flip side, as consciousness is awakening, it can kind of turn on this energy, and the energy can move sometimes in a very gentle way, but sometimes in a very difficult way that can be even painful as it moves through congestion that might have been in the body for a long period of time.
And how would you treat something like that then? Like how would you offer advice and alternatives?
Well, the most helpful thing for someone who's going through that is to talk with someone who is knowledgeable about what Kundalini is and is comfortable about it. Ideally, even someone who's been through that kind of awakening themselves and can offer a person just a sense of connection. And it may be a nonverbal connection or it may be verbal, but the connection basically says, oh, it's okay what's going on with you. In fact, it's positive and it may be uncomfortable for a period of time, but you're moving towards something which will actually be an enhancement of how you function in the world, how you feel about yourself. And you'll likely be moving into a more positive framework about life itself. So congratulations, and I'm happy to be with you as you're moving through this and be as supportive as I can. So
And it's so vital to have that, especially with psychedelics becoming so much more available, emergent practices, like meditation, like yoga you mentioned, or scaling up in society. And so all of this, really, everything you're doing, as you know, fits so well with the aim of the EPRC, which is precisely to give healthcare systems, mental health providers, and those helping to teach and promote various practices the information they need to make better decisions about how to both promote the benefits of these practices and manage the various effects they produce. So we also want to talk about how you're coming from the transpersonal world, transpersonal psychology. So as you try to scale IMHU courses to the clinical mainstream, I was just wondering what language and techniques you have found works best. For example, using words like Kundalini, which the general public might not be as aware of, could sort of make people uncomfortable. So kind of curious, sort of the way in which you think that how we might be able to scale courses and people doing something similar to the clinical mainstream.
So I find myself constantly thinking about language and what is going to work with certain communities. And also, if I use a word like Kundalini, that I also explain in terms that are more universal what it is, what it can feel like, in terms of sensations, what it can feel like in terms of emotions, how the culture generally looks at it, and very specifically, too, that in a spiritual emergency, what often can arise is people become more conscious of maybe pockets of experience that they've had and that they have shelved in the past. Very often trauma arises and makes a demand on the person in some way or another. We could say a demand on the psyche even, to say you must integrate this if you're going to move into more expanded states of consciousness. So in a spiritual emergency, that means that people not only are having possibly strong energy streaming going through their body, but also very strong emotions, which can flip from being laughter into tears within even seconds or minutes, which can look like a major mental health crisis to most outsiders. And in the midst of all of that, too, can arise these things that may have been shelved in the psyche that relate to earlier trauma in life, and possibly even trauma that comes through the family lineage or through ancestors or through the culture. So there can be a lot of different influences that come. And that my education in transpersonal psychology has really helped me to broaden my perspective and see that people in spiritual emergency really need sophisticated assistance in terms of someone who's well prepared to help them through mental health interventions, possibly something like family systems, for instance. Internal family systems is a wonderful procedure that's going on and more available these days. And also at times a person might need to see a psychiatrist who might be able to give them something to help them break the pattern of a disturbance so that they can just get enough sleep. Because sometimes when a spiritual emergency is very powerful, people find it extremely difficult to sleep. So I myself and IMHU take a very cautious approach to psychiatric medication, but we also don't say that it doesn't have value. We feel it does have value in certain situations, but needs to be used with caution. So a spiritual emergency can call on the need for several different kinds of resources. Some people will need psychiatric medication, like the sleep, possibly. Some people may respond very much to energy work that helps calm the nervous system while they're having strong energetic experiences. Some people will feel that, find that being sequestered for a period of time and not having to deal with some obligations with work and family, but just having time out to sort out the profound experiences they're having is the most important part. So I could go on and list many different resources that people might need to draw from in order to resolve and get to the other side of their spiritual emergency. But I would say that it's always best to have someone on the team, let's say on the caring team, who does have the ability to relate from a position of having lived experience with what the person in spiritual emergency is going through, but also that person has access to and uses a medical professional that can give them a physical checkup, because sometimes a physical issue can manifest as something even similar to a Kundalini awakening process. And there are other physical issues that can manifest in aspects of what we call spiritual emergency. So a physical checkup can be important. And then just the consistency of connection and the people on the team having very positive expectation around what is going on. And of course, it's extremely important that the person in spiritual emergency is in a place of safety. And for some people, that's easy. You just shut the door and other people bring you food and you have the time you need and you're in your home and it's warm and there's no problem. but for other people it can be much more dramatic, and they may need to be really in a safe place with a someone who is in a supervisory position for 24-hour care. So they have someone that they can talk to and relate with at any time, night or day. So as you can see, Bryn, I can go on and on about this. And so I'm going to cut that particular part of the story and say, in relationship to EPRC, I feel that language is extremely important. And I would love to see a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders completely rewritten so that it incorporates the language of spirituality, because it's well known that spiritual practices actually can assist a person to move into greater health. So that's very well established these days. And spirituality can help us not only with our physical well-being, but our mental well-being. So it deserves to have a place in the way we talk about our psychology, our psychiatry, and the disturbances that can happen. So it seems to me that that the work of EPRC is extremely needed, and to find a universal language that could be used throughout the world is an extremely steep task. And unfortunately, I think some of the language that we borrow from Eastern philosophy is the best we can come up with, but it may need to be defined within, let's say it's the DSM or whatever. So I just applaud EPRC for what it's doing. I feel very happy that IMHU, Integrative Mental Health University, is aligned and an ally of EPRC. And I'm happy that we are in a position also to offer educational courses to healthcare providers that allow them also to get CEs to get the training they need so that they're in a position to help people who are in spiritual emergency or who are in a process of spiritual emergence and looking for language and looking for a conceptual framework and looking for support.
Absolutely. That's all
I
so
hope that
valuable.
answers your question.
Perfectly. Yeah. And again, just so thrilled to have you aligned with the EPRC and the language thing. Yeah, it is so key. Dr. Daniel Ingram obviously always talks about the importance of ontological neutrality or agnosticism in order to really reach all cultures and the world and not alienate some people, so we have like transpersonal psychology in the clinical mainstream. And then I think what you've really talked about beautifully is the importance of like the synthesis between spirituality and science and how they're not opposing, but complementary and necessary to one another. So yeah, I really, really, really value the work you're doing and find it amazing. I got to take a few of Dr. Bragdon's courses and just one of them, again, helping someone in spiritual emergency, and just found it just absolutely invaluable and so key. So did you want to maybe mention a couple of the courses that you think would be of interest to the audience members?
Sure. Thank you for that. We do try to define terms and have that be very accessible to anyone who comes by our website. So especially the free courses of spiritual emergency, what is it? And also psychosis, what is it? Because in the mental health field, there are a lot of people who are conversing about the need to really change the way we see the upsetting circumstances and upsetting manifestations that we've been calling psychosis. So we give a rundown in that course about what the conventional thinking is, and also some of the conversation that's going on now about psychosis. Because many people who are in a spiritual emergency may be actually improperly diagnosed with psychosis. So that particular conversation is very important. And I would say that one of the things that is unique to IMHU is the course you just mentioned, which is how to effectively support someone in spiritual emergency. So that is, we offer CEs for that, and we are offering 5 online webinars that people can take at any particular time. and also a scheduled online conversation that happens every 2 weeks with me as the facilitator, so that people can ask questions and we can discuss certain aspects of how a spiritual emergency might happen. So there is a esoteric category of spiritual emergency called possession that many people shy away from and say, wait a minute, that's old world, that can't happen in science. But there are more people now bringing science into spirituality. And so I just finished reading a book on how Dick Schwartz, who is the person who founded Internal Family Systems, is recognizing that there is something called unattached burdens, or UB as they call it, which may relate to something that has been called possession. So it's very curious to me how more people are stepping up to some things that have been pushed aside as just too strange, too weird, too woo-woo, and saying there is something behind this, and this is what we're seeing anecdotally in his case. But still, we go through the various categories of how a spiritual emergency may manifest. And then if someone wants to become a spiritual emergence coach, and that is available to peer specialists as well as licensed professionals, then we offer a 2-day workshop on location live that I've been teaching since 2015. We call it the practicum, and it is more experiential and offers skill building in how to really be with someone who is going through a spiritual emergency, what the ideal qualities are to bring forth in yourself so that you can be the most supportive, and some of the thoughts about how to conduct that support that have proven to be very helpful. And we're thrilled that we're attracting more nurses now, as well as licensed professionals, and that we're also have opened our doors to coaches as well as peer specialists and alcohol and addiction specialists. So we have a very rich audience in terms of the interactions that happen.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
it's really really key.
a few of the courses. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
they're amazing. I would definitely will include the link as well, but absolutely worth checking out. And also wondering, given your wisdom and experience and seniority in the field, sort of what you wish you might have known when you started that you now know, and kind of advice you would give people like the EPRC, sort of working towards similar goals.
I don't know if I can give any advice to EPRC. I feel like I draw a lot from the community itself. And one of the things that I would say that I was missing early on was the fact that there is so much negative thinking around spirituality. Because I had such great good fortune in being with the boyfriend I had when I was 18, but then also the Zen Buddhist Center I went to was led by a self-realized teacher, and also the organization that I'm involved with now, the Self-Realization Fellowship, is led by a self-realized person who is, and both of them recognized internationally. So I've had great good fortune in being able to tune into people who are very much oriented towards spirituality and have been very successful in terms of their own self-realization process. But I have, since the beginning, I think, just always thought, well, wait a minute, why aren't more people tuned into this? It's a source of bliss. It's a source of wisdom. And then I realized it just does not fit very easily into our conventional cultures around the world. Maybe India is a bit more tuned in, and certainly there are aspects of every culture that are very, very tuned in. And I certainly wouldn't want to forget the indigenous cultures around the world that have been tuned in to this for millennia. But how it is that we have grown a culture now that is still very suspicious of spirituality, really, and we continue to stand in a place where we say science has to create the underpinnings of spirituality in order for more people to believe that there is something of value here that's not part of the lunatic fringe. I certainly wasn't aware of that early on. I thought, oh, I've just found a part of life, philosophy, mental health, psychology that I'm interested in. And so
Yeah,
it's been a big wake up.
I bet. Yeah, it is such it's the resistance to it is really mind-boggling because of just how beautiful it is, and it is interesting. Do you think it has to do with sort of the current cultural mindset and that individualism that grew out of the Industrial Revolution, and that we're all separate and sort of fighting against one each other and trying to achieve things, versus that indigenous worldview that recognizes we're all deeply interconnected? Do you think we have to like change our worldview in some way?
Yes.
Yeah.
You put it very well.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you think that we achieve that? Sorry.
Oh, well, I think it's a grassroots effort that's going on right now, and people aren't necessarily conscious that they're wanting to change the culture, but they are drawn to more meaning in their life and more connect. They might say to themselves, I want more connection to nature, I want more connection to my deeper self. But in the process, and a lot of this is going on, I think, in the psychedelics movement, in the process, people are creating a change in our culture. There's like a sea change, if you will, in the field of consciousness. And the other thing I'm very excited about is just to look at the universities that are creating actually centers underneath their wall or within their walls for the study of spirituality and health. So I know that Columbia has a program going on. Harvard has been leading different conferences about this. The Harvard of the South, Emory University, just in April of this year, 2023, had a major consortium that was also looking at the science of spirituality. And the University of Minnesota since 1995 has had a Center for Spirituality and Health that is very active and very dynamic. Yale University has also gotten on board, and they have 2 centers there which are looking at the science of spirituality. So, you know, it's a grassroots sea change that's going on, but it's also happening in universities, and it may be that it's the grassroots interest in this consciousness expansion that is leading to centers saying, okay, let's really find the science behind this. Yeah. It's a very exciting time to be alive.
It really is, yeah. And actually, so I imagine you're just going to keep working in this. So say keep working for another 30, 40 years. What would the world look like ideally, especially, and what would the clinical mainstream know, and how would things look ideally to you?
Well, if EPRC and IMHU have their way, then everyone trained into the mental health field as well as the field of medicine would be able to recognize spiritual emergence, the process of spiritual awakening, and also be able to recognize when someone is having a crisis within that process and be able to attend to them in the most effective and compassionate way. And so it would be completely integrated. The knowledge of spirituality and how to care for people and help them to manage their own spiritual awakening would be completely integrated, seamlessly integrated into our healthcare systems. That's what I'd like to see.
And so say someone were presenting with spiritual emergency, how would they be treated in the future?
Well, I would love to see that we have respite homes throughout the world, and someone who is going into a spiritual emergency might be recognized even by their family or by their loved ones as going through this kind of a process of spiritual emergency, because even, I'm talking 30 or 40 years in the future, even our educational systems teach about mental health and give a education that's similar to physical education, but it's really mental health education. So every child is able to even recognize the language of spiritual emergence in their own culture, in their own language. And then if someone is in a spiritual emergency, they would more likely know exactly where to take that particular person. If they need like a respite house where they can take respite from their regular activities and responsibilities and have someone 24 hours a day to be with them, someone with lived experience who can be compassionate and hold space for them as they're moving through the process. And also that people who are on the front line and emergency care workers completely acknowledge what spiritual emergency is about and will take people to the place that will be really fashioned in the ideal way to take care of the spiritual emergency. And I just want to impress upon people who might be listening to this that if the spiritual emergency is well taken care of, people end up feeling much more at peace with themselves, much more happy, content with their lives, and most often want to be in service to others who are also awakening, and to the culture that is awakening, and to the earth that is looking to sustain us, even though at this particular point we seem to be moving against that flow. But people who resolve their spiritual emergency oftentimes become very much activists in terms of assisting the earth and assisting all people to live a sustainable existence.
Yeah, that's one of the best parts of it that I've noticed, and that has helped with depression, is that being of service to others, and that's just come hand in hand with that spiritual emergence. So, and why this work is so key, and why what you're doing is so important. And again, just so grateful you're part of the EPRC as well. To end off the interview, I was wondering if you want to talk about where you find the most joy in your work and positivity. Yeah, just sparks of joy.
I'd say with connecting with individuals as well as the groups. So last weekend I was near Asheville, North Carolina, with a lovely group of people in a beautiful retreat center on a lake, and we were connecting with nature as well as connecting with each other in the process of learning how to assist people in spiritual emergency. And everyone felt safe to talk about their own spiritual emergence experiences without being called a lunatic. So oftentimes when people come together in these sessions, they are saying things like, this is the first time I've been with a group of people where I feel safe to talk about these experiences. So that brings me a great deal of joy. And my private practice, I work with people individually, typically over Zoom these days. And it's a complete pleasure to be working with people. And again, they feel safe to talk about their experiences and are really looking for some guidance in terms of opening up to more expanded states of consciousness. And I'm happy to share what I know.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Emma. It's honestly been such a joy to talk to you. So excited about the work we're doing together with EPRC and IMHU. People listening, definitely check out the courses. There are free courses as well. Again, I'll include a link in the bio and everything. But thank you so much, Emma. This has just been wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Ya ta ra đi có